Hey everyone, it's Chris Carter here from the North Shore Drive podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined today by Ray Fittipaldo. We're both still in Cincinnati as we give you our thoughts on the Steelers' big 44-38 win over the Bengals, advancing the team to 9-3, what Russell Wilson did right, what's going on defense, and where things stand in the AFC North, all next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here today, joined by Ray Fittipaldo, one of our great Steelers beat writers. And as always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps, on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Whether you're injured in a car accident or hurt on the job, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped injury victims for over 40 years recover more than $2 billion on their behalf. If you or a loved one have someone seriously injured, call in an accident, call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Ray, coming into this game, the Steelers' offense was highly in question. They did not look all together in Cleveland. They scored 19 points there. They only scored 16 points in all field goals against 18 points with 6 field goals against the Ravens. It was a tough sled in the last 2 weeks, and people were wondering, is Russell Wilson cooked? Is it over for him? Is he ever going to be able to throw more than a touchdown in a game? And then he has the game of his life. Second most passing yards by him in a game ever in his career, and that's a long career. 29 of 38, 414 passing yards, only took 2 sacks, 3 touchdown passes, and an interception that was a pick six, albeit controversial one at that with how George Pickens was handled on the play. But Ray, you gave him very high marks for this game, obviously. But to me, I think this was a very good sign that if the Steelers' offense gets into a rhythm, it can be very tough to stop, because in this game, he completed a pass to 10 different players throughout this contest. That makes it very hard for a defense to say, hey, let's just take away one guy. You have to consider everyone on the field.
Yeah, I think, the Steelers proved today. I know it's only one game, and listen, the Bengals defense isn't very good, but they showed that they could win in different ways. I think most of their big wins in recent years have been of the ilk where they'll beat a Baltimore 18-16, and it's on the backs of the defense. For the first time in a while, I feel like the Steelers can win in a shootout like that, and they could possibly, win a playoff game or two because they are that type of a football team now. Listen, Joe Burrow and the Bengals are really good. I mean, they do what they did to the Steelers today. They do that to a lot of teams. If you look at their past month, Chris, they're averaging over 30 points per game. So when you look at the totality of what the Steelers did today, the defense bent, didn't break, had some splash plays that really turned the tide for them. But for me, this game was all about the offense, and it was impressive to watch Russell Wilson go out there and work today. It was a really, by far, his best game as a Steeler, and I would venture to say his best game in a few years. I know he didn't have a game like this with the Broncos. You probably have to go back to, 2018 or 2019 to have him, put up the numbers he did today for the Steelers.
I saw a lot of people saying, hey, this has a lot of the feels of the Legion of Boom team with a defense that's high flying, makes big plays, but when it doesn't, it has a ground game or a passing game with Russell Wilson at the helm of it. But I don't think we can overlook the run game either here. Ray, Najee Harris, 16 carries, 75 yards, also caught 6 passes for 54 yards. He gets over 100 in all-purpose for this game. Also had a rushing touchdown. As a team, the Steelers averaged over 4.2 yards per carry, and that includes 3 one-yard runs from Russell Wilson to kind of bring that average down. But the offensive line that had its way both in pass protection and in running the ball. Trey Hendrickson, who's the leading sack man in the NFL, was made a non-factor in this game. Dan Moore Jr. deserves credit for that.
Yeah, and the few times I watched that matchup, Dan Moore had him on an island, and I thought he did really, really well against him. Now, I didn't single, I didn't watch, that much match up the entire game, but the few times that I did, more clearly won those matchups. So good bounce back game for him. We all know he had some struggles against Myles Garrett. But really, the 2 sacks that Russ took, Chris, both of them were kind of like coverage sacks. He slid down, did the right thing, didn't put the ball in jeopardy. So I have no issue with the way the offensive line played. And when you look at the running game too, it wasn't the focal point of the offense today, but you got to have some balance. And when they went to it, you had over 4 yards of carries. So all around, just a terrific day for this offense.
Certainly, I think, and again, it wasn't overly reliant on one player's talent. Like this was an execution. This was an execution that was really solid, but it was a schematic win for the Steelers. They had answers for everything the Bengals were trying to do on defense. And listen, yes, the Bengals are one of the worst defenses in the NFL, but no one was saying that about the Ravens, and the Ravens were eking out 30 to 30 wins, against the Bengals this year, and that's how they got 2 wins over the Bengals this year. So I think it's a good sign for the Steelers. They're able to do that too, because again, you have to be able to win different ways in today's NFL. To your point, Ray, they've showed over the last 4 years they can win the rock fight. They can hold you. If they can kick 6 field goals and win a game because they're able to. If they put you in the rock fight with them, they're going to find a way to edge you out there. But they need to show the ability to, hey, you know what? If your offense is just cooking, if you're just making really good plays, we have other ways to answer that for you. And this time it was the offense as a whole. And again, you look at the receiving numbers. Pat Freiermuth, really good. Six of catches on 7 targets, 68 yards. Najee Harris, 6 of 6 for 54 yards. Warren, 4 for 4 for 55. Pickens, 3 for 6 for 74. Just a very even smattering of the yards to show that, hey, if you're a defense and you want to take one thing away, the Steelers are happy to go to another. Heck, on a critical 3rd down late in the game, Russell Wilson gets a 0 blitz from the Bengals and trusts Van Jefferson to win one-on-one in his route, and he wins in a huge way for a 43-yard gain that set up a late score for the Steelers. To me, this is what the Steelers' offense that they've always wanted it to be. It doesn't have to be overly reliant on Najee getting 200 yards or George Pickens getting 200 yards. It's about, hey, Russell Wilson's gonna pick at you with all the different skill guys this team has. The offensive line's gonna bully you enough, and this offense can go when it gets into a rhythm.
Yeah, you rattled off, I think, about 6 or 7 names of those 10 pass catchers, and you didn't even mention Calvin Austin, who had a touchdown for a 2nd week in a row, and he leaves the game early with a head injury. That's unfortunate for him, but I think he's kind of been stepping up almost into that number 2 role that everyone kind of said that's what they need. And, Calvin Austin has provided those big plays. So hopefully, he's okay for the Browns game. We'll have to watch that during the week. The screen game, I don't even know if you want to call it a screen game, kind of like little slip screens. The Bengals weren't covering early in the game. They kind of shut that down in the second half. But Chris, Cordero Patterson, Jalen Warren, Najee Harris combined for 13 catches and 146 yards. And it was like taking candy from a baby. I mean, every time they threw that pass, it was like a 6 or 7 yard gain. So, Russell Wilson just orchestrated things beautifully. He hit Pickens for a deep ball down the sideline, but this wasn't like his typical game where it's like feast or famine, deep balls or nothing. I mean, this game he picked apart, a bad Bengals defense, and you could argue they probably should have had 50 points, if they don't get a field goal blocked and they are a little bit more efficient. This was a game where they were pretty much clicking on all cylinders from the get-go.
They certainly were. I want to talk to you, Ray, about this defense too, because it's weird. They gave up a lot of points, but I still feel like they did a lot of good things in this game. And I want to talk about the things they did good versus things they did not so good. We'll get to that and the state of the division next here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, remind you, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. If you're injured in an accident, you're probably wondering, what's next? Well, for over 40 years, Edgar Snyder Associates have helped injury victims answer that very question, what's next? Whether it's gathering evidence, collecting medical records, or dealing with the insurance companies, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped over 75,000 people handle the question, what's next? Call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about the Steelers defense. Joe Burrow has a good day as he's had several times for several games now. 28 of 38, 309, did take 4 sacks, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, but also committed 2 turnovers in sack fumbles that the Steelers were able to flip into big plays here. What is your assessment of this defense after this game, Ray? Because, yeah, they gave up a lot of points, but they also forced 3 crucial turnovers, scored points themselves, and ultimately were able to get the job done long enough to get the win.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting after the game. I think both Mike Tomlin, pretty much every Steelers player talked about how they kind of knew going into this game that it was going to be a shootout. So, it's kind of funny hearing them say that because we all look at this defense as one of the best in the league. But Chris, this is the NFL. Sometimes teams are going to be able to score on you. This is an offensive league, and I thought the Steelers had the right frame of mind going into this game. They knew what type of a game it was going to be, and they prepared as such. So let's break it down. The 2 huge strip sacks, the 1 scoop and score by Peyton Wilson. A 5th interception for Dante Jackson. That was all good. Game-changing types of plays those 3 turnovers. I know they didn't convert on the Jackson turnover. That was an unfortunate 3 and out, but obviously Peyton Wilson scores on Herbig's strip sack. And people forget, when TJ Watt strip sacked him in the second quarter, it was a 21-21 ball game, and they were in Steelers territory. So it was – that was still very much a ball game at that point. The negative, play at the end of the game, it's becoming an issue. You can't give up a 47-yard catch to Jamar Chase when you're up by 2 scores and you're just trying to bleed clock. I mean, that was a recipe for disaster. They got out of the stadium with the win, but you can't do that. And they have been giving up more big plays recently. The Bengals had 5 plays of 20 yards or more. They had a couple of 20-yard plays. They had that 47-yarder to Chase. I think Higgins had one maybe over 30 yards. I think he maybe had a 37-yarder in there. So, they got to clean that up. They got to get better. But listen, they lead the league in turnovers. They got 25 turnovers right now. I know we got tonight's game and the Monday night game to go, but they're probably going to finish number 1 in the league in turnovers after 12 games. If you do that, you're going to win a lot of football games, and that's the way they beat the Bengals. They won the turnover battle 3-1, and on one of those, they scored a big touchdown.
It certainly was big. We'll get to the secondary in a sec here, Ray, but I want to talk about this defensive front. Ray, something you and I talked about going into this game was how they weren't moving TJ Watt around a lot the last couple of weeks after looked at. They moved him all over the defense. He was lining up in the middle. He was lining up on the right. He was lining up on the left. He was going every single where. And it kind of forced the Bengals to have to communicate a little bit more. Not only does TJ Watt get a sack strip, and I think he finished with 2 sacks in this game, if I'm correct here.
Yes.
So he gets 2 sacks in this game, and then Nick Herbig with a sack strip fumble. That one turns into a touchdown for the Steelers. So even in a week where they still don't have Alex Highsmith back, those edge rushers turn into the big playmakers in this game. And he also can't put down Cam Hayward, who I thought was phenomenal in this game. He also added a sack in this game as well, getting after the quarterback, 5 tackles, including a huge tackle for loss where he blew up I think it was Chase Brown in the backfield. Also batted a pass that turned into Dante Jackson's interception. I mean, that's pretty awesome stuff from your front to make all those types of plays.
Yeah, and it's your stars stepping up. TJ with the 2 big sacks. Your highest paid guy is Cam Hayward. I mean, how often do we say it? This season is a bounce back season. He's playing like an all-pro again. I mean, we're almost 3/4 of the way through the season, Chris, and I would not be surprised if he's named first team all-pro for the 4th time in his career.
Wild.
I mean, that's Hall of Fame stuff, and to get one of those when you're 35 years old, is phenomenal. So, the front played really well. I mean, Peyton Wilson is playing awesome. I haven't really checked around the league for how other rookies are doing, but nobody's making more big plays than that guy. He had that interception a few weeks ago to seal that Baltimore game, and then he comes up with another great play, scoop and score in this game. So he's having an impact for a guy who was a compensatory 3rd-round pick. He's added a lot to this defense. Nick Herbig, a 4th-round pick. Yeah, we could talk about the stars all day, but they've had some mid-round picks and some other guys like Deshaun Elliott, a free agent. Guys like that come through. You need that. You can't be just a star-laden defense. You need role players to come through with big games too, and those guys certainly did that today.
Certainly. I want to question you now about Joey Porter Jr. I believe 5 penalties called against him in this game. 4 of them were accepted. 1 was declined because he committed 2 penalties on the same thing. Now, Mike Tomlin seemed kind of to push back against this when I asked him about it in the post-game presser. I was like, hey, what do you guys have to coach Joey to do? And he said, you know what? We recognize that he called T. Higgins a goon, and we don't want him to goon us, meaning bullying him off the line. And I will agree with this assessment, Ray. The Bengals receivers were trying to play very physical football. A lot of push-offs from Jamar Chase, a lot of push-offs from T. Higgins, and you saw Joey Porter Jr. trying to counter that. But every time he did, he was called for it. And so there's some you're like, well, I guess in the Steelers books, like they're going to try to still coach him to do better in those situations. But there has to be an acknowledgement. They're like, look, these guys are trying to push off, and you can't let them. Otherwise, they'll just eat you up for a lot of big plays. And to your point, they gave up big plays in this game, but none of the Bengals receivers finished with over 100 yards. And I look at Joey Porter Jr., 5 tackles in this game, and all those he has as many tackles as he has penalties called against them. But Ray, this is back-to-back weeks where I think Joey Porter Jr. has not played well. And with the way that things worked out against the Browns, and then this week, how much of the penalties do you really put on Joey Porter Jr., and how much of this do you think is just, hey, sometimes those things go against you when you're going up against big physical wide receivers that are trying to bully you?
Yeah, I mean, listen, he had a reputation coming into the league that he was a handsy player and that he got a lot of penalties called on him, and that's followed him into the league on occasion. I'm not going to say it's going to define him, but certainly the last couple of games it has. And every time we ask Mike Tomlin or Terrell Austin about it, they say, well, I'm not concerned about it yet, but if it keeps happening, if it becomes a trend, then we'll work to rectify it. Well, it's kind of been a trend now the last couple of games, hasn't it? So, I thought the one DPI in the end zone was a little bit ticky-tacky. They called him also for a defensive holding on the same play. I mean, the Steelers had 3 defensive penalties on one play, but you see that about once a season. Joey has to clean it up. I think he knows he has to clean it up. And until he does, let's face it, everyone's watching this tape.
Yeah.
Teams are going to go after him. He's like George Pickens right now. He's got a target on his back. He's got a reputation, and until he cleans it up and he plays in a little bit different way, doesn't use his hands as much, doesn't grab as much, then nothing's going to change. So he has to work this week to get better. Jameis Winston knows it. He's coming into Acrisure on Sunday, so Joey better be ready.
We better be ready. We'll talk about George Pickens and some of those things that went on during the Steelers game, as well as where the Steelers are now in the division, because the Ravens lost to the Eagles, and that certainly paints an interesting picture here as we get to the final 5 games of the regular season for the Steelers. All that here next on the North Shore Drive podcast from Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, remind you this show is also brought to you by Sabinas, Kane, and Gallucci. They're your mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them today for a free consultation. That's Sabinas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you can get your new Honda vehicle at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, PA, or visit their website, moonhonda.com. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
It's that time of year again to get the Honda of your dreams during Happy Honda Days, where you'll find great offers on a sporty new Civic, spirited Accord, fun to drive HRV, and versatile CRV. So don't wait, turn your holiday dreams into reality with a new Honda named KBB.com's best value brand. Buy online, reserve from select dealers, or visit your local Honda dealer today.
Welcome back to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter here with Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's get into some things here. I want to talk about George Pickens because Pickens in this game, I mean, statistically, he got the job done when he was called upon, right? Like they threw him the ball. He was making tough catches, made a brilliant sideline grab, took a screen to the end zone, 74 yards, a touchdown, 3 catches. You'll take that on most days. But 2 tough penalties on him that called back some of his bigger plays. One in particular on the sideline grab where I guess he was penalized for making the gun signal with his hand when he said he was just pointing for the first down. But looking at it, I look at it and I see like, man, like George Pickens getting called for these things. This has become a thing. Like you're saying, Joey Porter Jr. is looked at for being handsy. George Pickens is looked at for doing things, and I think that's where Mike Tomlin said that he has to grow up a little bit in that department. But I also wonder, Ray, like how much of this is something that's going to persist for the Steelers and maybe cost them in bigger moments. It didn't end up costing them today.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you can look at it and you could say it's ticky tacky, it's the no fun league, but both of those penalties were penalties by the book. You can't just hand the ball to another player.
That's a straight up penalty every time.
You're going to get called for that every time. The gun gesture. They're trying to take that out of the league. It's been a point of emphasis with all the gun crime that's happened in this country. So I mean I get it. The worrisome thing for me is George Pickens never seems to have any accountability for his actions. He spoke after the game. Kind of dismissive, about it. He's dismissive about it during the week when we talked to him. The second one, Chris, I think they got down to around the 15 or 10 yard line.
They were in the red zone.
You're about to go in and score a touchdown, and then you take a 15-yard penalty, and you end up kicking a field goal in a tight game. And the Steelers were in position at the end of that game where they had to get a first down to run out the clock, or the Bengals were going to have a chance to win that game. So just really bonehead mistakes, selfish play on George Pickens' part. I mean, I get it. I know why they put up with it. He's a great talent. It's the same story. We're watching a similar thing unfold here with George Pickens like we did with Antonio Brown, and you just wonder at what point is it all going to unravel. So, hopefully for the Steelers' sake, none of these mistakes cost them a football game, but they're probably lucky today that that second penalty didn't cost them.
Yeah. I think that the first penalty, I felt you can't commit that. You can't hand the ball to another guy. That's obvious trash talk. It's obvious taunting. You're there. When I saw it live, I have to admit that I thought the gun gesture call, but clearly he's saying first down, and he's doing that, and like I can't physically do it right now. I'm not going to take the time, but I've literally seen referees for years use just point with their 2 pointer fingers and say that's a first down. And I felt like that's what George Pickens was doing there. But, if the NFL is trying to outrule that, it's funny when people say, oh, you can't do that. And I'm just sitting there like, it's not like it's a holding penalty where like you took your hands outside the frame. It's just such a very silly thing to be penalizing. But hey, if the NFL wants to penalize it, George Pickens has to adjust to it, and that's going to be something that's going to have to continue to be a story for the Steelers. But I thought outside of that first moment, I thought he kept his head for most of the game, even in what was getting to be a chippy environment at times, because this was a divisional game, and both teams, the Bengals, this was their lifeline. If they lost this game, pretty much everyone's going to admit that they're out of it. Now they're 4-8. The Steelers 9-3, in an interesting spot.
Yeah, I mean, listen, George Pickens is allowed to just run back to the huddle too and get the next play. I mean, he caught that ball. He ran around the end zone, took a lap. I mean, at some point, I get it. You play with an edge. It's part of who you are. I mean, Mike Tomlin has been on record. He doesn't want to, diminish guys who have that, kind of gene in them. But at some point, just go back to the huddle and run the next play. I mean, it's kind of simple. I think everyone's kind of, sick of his antics. But guy's a great player. He's probably going to help you win more football games down the stretch. They might need him to make a big play in a game against the Chiefs or the Eagles or the Ravens to win a division. So, I get it. You just hope that maybe he grows up a little bit and doesn't make some of these silly plays.
Agreed there. Now you talked about that schedule there. The Steelers now sit 9-3. They are now a game and a half back up in the AFC North, where the Ravens lost to the Eagles in a tough contest in Baltimore. This kind of puts the Steelers in an interesting opportunity right now, because if you're looking at the rest of the way, they've blocked out the Bengals for the most part from winning the division. Actually, yeah, the Bengals literally cannot win the division anymore, so they've blocked them out. If they essentially win one more game and then also beat the Ravens on top of that, they will have clinched the AFC North. They could go win 2 of the next 5 games they have on their schedule, and if one of them's the Ravens game and they win another game, they've won the AFC North, which is kind of crazy to think of how close to that finish line that they've gotten here. We talked about the gauntlet coming after the bye week. They're 3-1, 4 games into that gauntlet. And the Ravens, they got to find answers. The Bengals pretty much out of it. The Eagles and the Chiefs, also 2 big dogs in this situation. Ray, what can you say about where the Steelers are? And did you see them being this close to winning the division on the 1st of December?
No, I mean, listen, they're in great position. I think, the good news for them is, you go to Cleveland, you lay an egg out there, and 1 week later, you're basically in the same position you were before that game. So, the only thing that really hurts you, I think they probably took themselves out of being the number 1 seed, losing that Browns game. I know they can still theoretically get it, but it would be a long shot now to get that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, as far as getting their first AFC North title since 2020, very much in play. I think, they're certainly the favorite right now, given what's going on in Baltimore. They not only lose that game to the Eagles, they lose it at home.
Yeah.
They do it again with another, very below average offensive performance from Lamar Jackson. So, it's interesting that they put up a lot of points, but when they play really good defenses, it seems like, they could be held in check. So they're not going away. I think it's all going to come down to that game right before Christmas in Baltimore. That's probably going to decide the AFC North. And listen, that's the way it should be, right? The NFL makes these late season games. They put off these division games until the end. I think they're gonna get what they wanted, and I think that game on December 21st is going to be for the AFC North and for a top seed in the AFC.
It certainly looks like it. And Ray, before we get out of here, I think one parallel I will draw, because Russell Wilson and Mike Tomlin, I think, did both a very good job. And people posed that, like, hey, you've now thrown for more touchdowns in 6 games than all of the quarterbacks combined or whatever. Like, that stat was being thrown out. And they were both like, we're not going to talk about last year. But I am going to talk about last year, because last year, when they lost that first game that they weren't supposed to win, funny enough, around the same time, when they lost to the Cardinals on December 3rd, they followed that with 2 back-to-back losses to teams that people thought that they should have beaten. The Patriots were a 2-win team on top of the Cardinals being a 2-win team. Colts were a team that were also fighting for playoff position. And everyone saw those 3 losses, and it was like, well, there it goes. There's all the momentum you built yourself. They had to win out to make the playoffs. This year, you get that first loss, and you don't let it build into another one. Russell Wilson, this team, them being able to stand up and say, hey, that one loss, that was 1 week, being able to cut that off and get the momentum shifted back into a positive vein for the Steelers, I think that's a really good sign for this year's football team, that they're not going to be a team that succumbs to the momentum of just a late
Yeah.
part of the season and, just a few things are going wrong and it snowballs into problems. They stand up, they're accountable, and they are a team that's finding ways to win in December now. And if they win just 2 more games and one of those are the Ravens, they win the division. But Ray, we could also be talking about, you mentioned, the 1 seed. That's going to be tough. Right now, the Bills are up pretty big on the Niners as we're recording this show. But that you still have a shot at the Chiefs right now. You have a chance to catch them. The Chiefs are eking teams out left and right, week after week after week. If you were able to beat the Chiefs and stay right with them, you could at least be the 2 seed and play the 7 seed at home, and that's something that could be a big advantage for the Steelers.
Yeah, listen, Chris, it's way too early to look ahead to potential matchups. Who do you want to play in the first round? But I'll throw this out there to you and to our viewers. Would you rather be like a 2 or a 3 seed and maybe play a home playoff game against a team like the Chargers or the Broncos? Or would you rather be a 5 seed and go on the road and play a Texans team that's kind of, I don't know,
they're up and down, but
they're good,
they're
but
still dangerous.
CJ Stroud isn't what he was last year. And, they eked out a win today against the bad Jaguars team. So it's going to be interesting. It won't be a death knell if they lose the North. They'll still, be a good team heading into the playoffs. I think as long as they are playing well going into the playoffs, you want to be playing your best football in January. As long as they do that, I think this team is going to have a shot. But obviously, you want to get that top seed. You want to get a home game. But this AFC is going to be tough. And in the end, Chris, it's going to come down to matchups. And, we'll see how that plays out here in a month or so.
We will see how that plays out. We'll have you covered all throughout it at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content of our daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're going to be driving back all Monday, but don't worry. We'll have you prepped all week long at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Tune in for all of our content. We'll see you again Wednesday on the North Shore Drive podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.